This was a reactionary, ultra-conservative piece that cost Monteverdi an awful lot of sweat and tears on his own admission, and was clearly slanted towards Rome, which was probably about the only other place in Italy which could have provided him the forces and the prestige and the security he was looking for. So it's logical that the volume was dedicated to the Pope, Paul V. Monteverdi was hedging his bets. Next come the Vespers. For larger forces, it says, ideal for St. Mark's, with its famous tradition of double choir psalm singing and its new band of wind players. And then come the jokers in the pack. Non nullis sacris concentibus, a few sacred concertos said to be suitable for the chapels or the chambers of princes. On the face of it, they look like detachable, separate pieces, and certainly their scale is much, much smaller than any of the rest of the music. Perhaps it was music he tried out in Mantua, very modern and very secular. But the title page doesn't tell you everything. These are photocopies of the original part books, and it's only when you get to the very back of the organ part that you find an index showing the order of service. Here are the 5 Vesper Psalms for the Feasts of the Blessed Virgin, the hymn, and 2 alternative settings of the Magnificat. This is flamboyant music on the grandest scale, but sandwiched between the psalm settings, Monteverdi has inserted his jokers, solo numbers for 1, 2, or 3 voices. This intimate music, chamber music really, is in bold contrast to the public statements of the Psalms. 3 out of 5 of these intruders are virtually love songs. Rome would never have tolerated this, but there's evidence to suggest that in Venice, with its tradition of independence and free thinking, he could just about get away with it. Ravishing and voluptuous. But can we really call this church music? It's stretching the term a bit. The text comes from the Song of Songs, the most erotic book of the Old Testament. And the idea is that all the sensuous stuff about the beloved is legitimized as worship of the Holy Virgin, rather in the same way that a painter like Veronese picked quite indiscriminately the prettiest girls as models for his portraits of Juno, Venus, or the Madonna. Monteverdi was breaking new ground. This intermixture of sacred and secular is just one of the many original features of the Vespers. If you remove the solo motets and reinstate the plain song, and if you reshuffle the published order as has become the fashion recently, you upset, I believe, Monteverdi's brilliantly symmetrical structure. Of course, individual movements can stand on their own, but then you lose the satisfying proportions of his own printed sequence. No one before had composed in such a dazzling variety of styles. No one had written church music on this scale before. It took a genius like Monteverdi to embrace all these contrasts of mood and style and to project a work lasting 90 minutes in almost architectural terms. And that's why St. Mark's Basilica seems to me the perfect setting for a Vespers performance. A place where the richness of both eye and ear can be satisfied. Nobody, I suppose, can ever forget their first view of St. Mark's, that incredible wedding cake of a church, with its hugely ornate facade, marble everywhere, and the mosaics on the floors and on the ceilings, and the cupolas encrusted with jewels, more a temple than a church. Well, imagine what it must have been like in Monteverdi's day, the colours even more vivid than they are today, the marble whiter, the mosaics even sharper, the golds more burnished, the whole place swathed with drapes, tapestries, and oriental carpets. Especially when the Doge came to church, because St. Mark's was his private chapel, as well as being the religious and political focal point for the whole city. 14 times a year, there were tremendous ceremonies here, with processions starting here in the Doge's palace and going all the way around the piazza. First of all would come the clergy in their robes, and then the ambassadors and the papal nuncio, and all the visiting dignitaries in their splendid finery, and then the Doge himself with his ermine tippet and his crimson shoes and that extraordinary golden cap that he wore, and preceded, as wherever he went in the city, by his special 6 silver trumpeters. You can imagine the whole city would be there. the crowds staring from the porticos in the square, leaning out of their windows, even climbing onto the roofs if they could find a way up. The bells of the great campanile would be rung, and the whole procession would go round the great square to enter St. Mark's by its west door. The first thing the crowd would see, though right in the distance and beyond the high altar, was the Pala d'Oro, a huge screen of gold and jewels, the most exotic and precious Byzantine treasure in St. Mark's. It was only swiveled round to face the public on those occasions when the Doge came to church. If he was a newly elected Doge, he was presented to the people from the right-hand pulpit, a curious hexagonal bigonzo, literally a tub, that was stolen by the Venetians from Constantinople. But on other state occasions, the musicians would sing from there, but they would be turned towards the high altar where the Doge and the senators would be seated in the chancel. On the opposite side is another double-decker pulpit under an onion-shaped canopy of bronze and marble, very Islamic in looks. It's features like this that makes one feel just how oriental St. Mark's is. Max Beerbohm compared the building to an Eastern garden that had by some Christian miracle petrified just when the flowers were fading. A garden where Muhammad had walked, and his spirit walks there yet. I feel that there's some of that spirit in Monteverdi's Vespers. But were the Vespers performed here in St. Marco sometime in Monteverdi's lifetime? We simply can't be sure. But it seems almost impossible to believe that they weren't. For example, back in 1613, at the time of his audition here, we know that he performed a piece of his own music involving an orchestra of around 30 players and a choir of about the same size. And what more appropriate than the Vespers recently published here? And then again, the procurators, in confirming him for the job as maestro here, referred to printed music of his that had been performed by the choir of St. Mark's here to their total satisfaction. It seems almost as if the Vespers really belonged here, and one can imagine Monteverdi exploiting the acoustics of this wonderful building, this natural theatre with its galleries and its arcades and its opportunities for dramatic exchanges between singers and echo effects. And the acoustics are incredibly pure. The sounds go right to the end with a complete smoothness and utter beauty. So, just how would the musicians have been deployed in St. Mark's? The evidence is contradictory. One contemporary painting shows the Doge in his private chapel, as it were, in front of the Pala d'Oro, the senators in the choir stalls, and the solo singers and instrumentalists arranged in various tiered balconies above. They would, of course, have been hidden from the congregation in the nave, the source of their sounds, in typical Baroque fashion, always a bit of a surprise. But where would the performers have been positioned on other major church festivals? It used to be thought that the choir sang from the two organ galleries behind me, but in fact it's much more likely that they sang either from the tub, the bigonzo, or from the double-decker pulpit on my right. But on special occasions they sang from the center of the church, as for instance when 4 Japanese princes came here in 1585. Then they erected 2 special rostra here in the center of the church. And that's exactly what we've done for our performance, because this too is a special occasion, a recreation of Monteverdi's Vespers of 1610 here in the Basilica, the very building that may well have inspired its composition.